Never react. Never explain. Just ignore. Most people hear those words and think they mean weakness. They think silence is surrender. They think refusal to engage means you have no answer, no confidence, no power. But that is because most people have been trained to misunderstand power from the beginning. They think power is loud. They think power announces itself. They think the strongest person in the room is the one speaking first, defending hardest, arguing longest, and proving the most. But Machiavelli understood something far more dangerous, something the modern world still refuses to accept. The person who reacts first usually loses first. The person who explains too much reveals too much. And the person who keeps trying to correct every insult, every accusation, every misunderstanding slowly hands control of his inner world to people who never deserved access to it in the first place. There is a reason weak people want your reaction. There is a reason manipulators want your explanation. There is a reason jealous people throw bait into your path and wait with patience for you to pick it up. It is not because they are looking for truth. It is not because they want understanding. It is not because they care about fairness. It is because your reaction gives them information. Your explanation gives them leverage. Your attention gives them status. The moment you respond emotionally, the game changes. You are no longer standing above the chaos. You are standing inside it. And inside chaos, the most impulsive person usually becomes the easiest person to control. That is the first truth you need to understand before we go any further. Most conflict is not about solving anything. Most conflict is about extracting something from you. Sometimes it is your peace. Sometimes it is your focus. Sometimes it is your image. Sometimes it is your emotional balance. But almost always, there is a hidden transaction beneath the surface. Someone says something careless, provocative, disrespectful, or false, and what they really want is not clarity. What they really want is movement. They want to move you off your center. They want to make you defend yourself. They want to make you chase understanding from people who were never confused. They want to pull you into a performance where they control the stage and you supply the energy. Machiavelli watched rulers lose power this way long before the modern man ever lost his peace in a comment section, an office conversation, a relationship, or a family argument. He understood that a leader who is easily provoked becomes predictable. A man who is predictable becomes manageable. And a man who is manageable can be played by anyone clever enough to study his triggers. That is why one of the darkest psychological advantages you can ever build is the ability to stay still when others expect movement, to stay silent when others expect defense, and to stay detached when others expect emotion. That kind of control unsettles people because it denies them the one thing they were reaching for all along: access. Most men never learn this. They still believe every accusation deserves an answer. They still believe every misunderstanding must be corrected. They still believe that if they just explain themselves clearly enough, honestly enough, passionately enough, the other person will finally understand. But life is not that innocent. Some people understand you perfectly and still choose to distort you because distortion serves them better than truth. Some people know exactly what they are doing when they provoke you. Some people are not confused by your silence. They are threatened by it. Because silence forces them to sit alone with their own tactics, and few people like what they see when their manipulation meets a wall instead of a wound. This is why ignoring someone is not always passive. Sometimes it is the most calculated move on the board. To ignore is to refuse to feed a dynamic that survives on your participation. To ignore is to recognize that not every battle is a misunderstanding and not every challenge deserves your energy. To ignore is to understand that your attention is not free, and every time you hand it to the wrong person, you are investing in your own exhaustion. Weak men spend their days reacting to noise. Powerful men decide what is worthy of a response and let the rest die from starvation. But this is harder than it sounds, because your ego will fight you before any enemy does. Your ego wants to answer. Your ego wants to correct the record. Your ego wants the final word, the clean explanation, the perfect comeback that restores your image and puts the other person in their place. And that is exactly why so many men lose. They are not defeated by their enemies. They are defeated by their own inability to leave the bait untouched. They call it honesty. They call it standing up for themselves. They call it clearing things up. But often what they are really doing is proving that anyone with the right words can pull them out of position. And once someone learns that about you, they never forget it. They know how to summon your energy. They know how to break your focus. They know how to control your timing without ever touching you directly. A single insult, a single accusation, a single passive-aggressive remark, a single public slight, and suddenly your mind is no longer your own. It is orbiting them, thinking about them, rehearsing answers for them, planning how to explain yourself to them, defending your worth against people who would never be qualified to define it. This is how men lose entire days, entire months, sometimes entire years. Not because they lacked ability, but because they kept giving their mind to people who contributed nothing to their future. The man Machiavelli respected was not the man who responded to everything. It was the man who understood hierarchy, timing, and perception. The man who knew that sometimes, the strongest answer is absence. Sometimes the most devastating reply is emotional invisibility. Sometimes the cleanest victory is letting someone perform alone until their own behavior exposes them better than your words ever could. Because when you react too quickly, you interrupt the process by which fools reveal themselves. When you explain too much, you rescue people from the consequences of misjudging you. When you keep engaging, you keep giving life to something that would have died if you had simply refused to breathe into it. So in this video, we are going deeper than simple advice. This is not about being cold for the sake of appearance. This is not about pretending not to care when you are burning inside. This is about understanding 7 dark psychological tricks hidden inside one principle: never react, never explain, just ignore. Not because you are weak, not because you are afraid, but because you finally understand how power actually moves beneath the surface of human behavior. Each of these 7 tricks will show you how manipulators bait, how insecure people provoke, how attention seekers feed on response, and how the disciplined man turns all of that into an advantage without raising his voice, without proving his worth, and without stepping off his path. Because once you understand this, everything changes. You stop treating every conflict like a call to battle. You stop confusing emotional urgency with real importance. You stop rewarding disrespect with explanation. And most importantly, you stop letting other people decide when your peace begins and ends. That is where real power starts. The first dark psychology trick is this: people provoke you to measure your weakness. Most men think provocation is about anger. They think when someone disrespects them, interrupts them, dismisses them, mocks them, or questions them, the other person is simply being rude, insecure, or emotional. Sometimes that is true, but it is rarely the whole truth. Beneath many acts of provocation there is a quiet test taking place. The other person is trying to discover how easy you are to move. They are studying what it takes to pull you out of character. They are watching how quickly your composure collapses, how badly you need to be understood, and how much pressure your identity can handle before it starts defending itself in public. This is why a lot of disrespect does not begin with direct attack. It begins with something smaller, almost casual, a dismissive tone, a joke that carries just enough venom to make you feel it, a public contradiction, a delayed reply, a cold glance, a subtle undermining of your effort, your intelligence, or your authority. On the surface, these things seem minor, but psychologically, they function like probes. The person is not only expressing something, they are collecting information. If you immediately become defensive, they learn that your ego is accessible. If you over-explain, they learn that your image matters too much. If you get angry too quickly, they learn that your emotions can be activated on command. And once people learn where your emotional doors are, they know exactly where to knock next time. Machiavelli understood that power belongs to the man who is hardest to read and hardest to move. Not because he feels nothing, but because he reveals nothing cheaply. That distinction matters. A weak man imagines control means pretending. He suppresses his anger badly, hides his hurt poorly, and eventually explodes because what he calls control was only delay. But a disciplined man does something far more dangerous. He notices the provocation, understands the intent beneath it, and decides consciously whether the situation deserves any response at all. Most of the time, it does not. Most bait is not designed to elevate truth. It is designed to expose your instability. Think about how often people push not because they are strong, but because they are uncertain. They want reassurance that they can still affect you. They want to know that they still live somewhere in your nervous system. This happens in workplaces, friendships, families, breakups, and social environments every day. A colleague makes a cutting comment in a meeting not because your work threatens them directly, but because they want to see if they can shake your confidence in front of others. An ex reaches out with something vague and emotionally charged not because they want peace, but because they want proof that they can still disturb your mind. A friend keeps making disrespectful jokes not because he is playful, but because he is testing how much of himself he can project onto you without consequences. In every case, the visible behavior is not the whole event. The hidden event is measurement. The moment you understand this, your relationship with provocation changes completely. You stop seeing every insult as a call to defend your dignity. You begin seeing it as data. You begin asking a far more useful question. What are they trying to learn about me right now? That question alone can save you from dozens of unnecessary reactions because it puts you back in the position of observer rather than participant. And the observer always has more power than the man trapped inside the performance. The second trick grows out of the first. People ask for explanations when they want control, not clarity. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in human interaction. Many men still believe that if they explain themselves carefully, they can restore order, fix perception, and clear tension. They think the request for explanation is honest, they think the other person simply lacks information. But often the demand for explanation has nothing to do with truth. It is a power move disguised as curiosity. Why did you do that? Why didn't you call? Why were you quiet? Why didn't you answer? Why are you acting different? Why did you leave? Why did you choose that? Why did you say no? On the surface, these questions sound innocent. But in the wrong hands, they are not questions. They are attempts to position you beneath someone else's judgment. The moment you begin over-explaining, the dynamic shifts. You are no longer acting from authority. You are seeking permission to be understood. You are trying to justify your actions to someone who may not have earned the right to examine them in the first place. Machiavelli recognized that explanation is dangerous because it reveals motive, and motive reveals map. The more people know about why you move, the easier it becomes to predict how you will move next. Explanations expose values, fears, attachments, and internal logic. That is useful information in the hands of someone who loves you wisely. But in the hands of someone competitive, resentful, manipulative, or emotionally immature, it becomes leverage. They study your reasoning not to understand it, but to find pressure points inside it. They listen for what hurts you, what matters to you, what you cannot bear to be accused of, and what kind of misunderstanding makes you rush to defend yourself. Once they know that, they own a key to your behavior. This is why some people keep asking questions long after your answer should have satisfied them. The goal was never resolution. The goal was exposure. They want to keep you talking until your composure weakens and your need for approval becomes visible. They want the version of you that begins calm but ends up pleading to be seen correctly. That version is easier to dominate. A man who understands this does not become rude or cryptic for no reason. He simply becomes precise. He learns that not every question deserves a full answer. Not every accusation deserves correction. Not every misunderstanding deserves repair. He stops believing that his peace depends on being interpreted correctly by everyone around him. And that single shift changes everything, because the man who no longer needs universal understand becomes incredibly difficult to manipulate. The third trick is even darker. People keep talking when your reaction is feeding their identity. This is why ignoring someone can be so powerful. Some people do not want agreement. They do not want peace. They do not even want victory in the conventional sense. What they want is emotional relevance. They want to feel that they can still produce movement in another human being. For many insecure people, that feeling becomes addictive. If they can upset you, interrupt you, confuse you, offend you, or pull you into repeated cycles of explanation, then they feel powerful for a moment. They feel significant. Your reaction becomes proof of their impact. This is why some people become more active, not less, when you engage them. You think the discussion is moving toward closure, but for them, it is moving toward nourishment. Every response tells them they still matter. Every paragraph you send, every long clarification, every defensive explanation, every emotional message, every visible frustration confirms that they have access. And access is exactly what they wanted from the start. When you ignore them, something unsettling happens. The emotional supply disappears. They are left alone with their own performance. Without your reaction, their strategy loses oxygen. Without your explanation, their authority weakens. Without your emotional participation, the game begins collapsing under its own emptiness. That is why people often escalate before they disappear. When someone loses access to your reactions, they often become louder, sharper, or more dramatic for a short time. Not because they are winning, but because they are starving. A lot of men misread this stage. They think escalation means they should finally answer, finally correct things, finally put the other person in their place. But often that is the exact moment silence becomes most powerful, because once someone has shown that your non-reaction disturbs them, have accidentally revealed the truth. They were never in control. They were dependent on your participation. The fourth trick is this: the more you defend your image, the easier it becomes to damage it. This is one of the cruel paradoxes of social power, and most men learn it too late. They believe reputation is protected by constant correction. They think if someone misrepresents them, they must immediately answer. If someone spreads something false, they must set the record straight. If someone doubts them publicly, they must respond publicly. It feels logical. It feels honorable. It feels necessary. But psychologically, repeated self-defense often creates the exact impression you were trying to avoid. Why? Because desperate defense communicates insecurity faster than accusation communicates guilt. The moment a man starts chasing every rumor, every opinion, every subtle slight, he unconsciously tells the room that perception owns him. He tells people that the fastest way to control his behavior is to threaten his image. And once that becomes visible, others begin using it. Some do it intentionally. Others do it instinctively. But either way, the result is the same. You become easier to manage because your need to be seen correctly has become public knowledge. Machiavelli understood that perception matters, but he also understood something deeper. Perception is not controlled through panic. It is controlled through consistency, timing, and the disciplined refusal to look rattled. A man who is endlessly correcting himself appears unstable even when he is innocent. A man who remains grounded, selective, and measured appears stronger even when others attempt to distort him. This does not mean you never respond. It means you do not respond from emotional urgency. You respond, if necessary, from strategy. There is a difference between clarification and self-defense. Clarification is brief, clean, and complete. Self-defense is repetitive, emotional, and leaking. Clarification says what needs to be said and leaves. Self-defense keeps talking because it is not trying to inform. It is trying to repair internal discomfort by forcing external agreement. That rarely works. The more a man tries to make everyone see him correctly, the more attention he draws to the very narrative he wants to erase. People begin wondering why he is working so hard. And the social mind is merciless with visible insecurity. It often trusts composure over explanation. This is why some of the strongest men in any room are misunderstood for long periods and still refuse to chase interpretation. They know that over time, behavior settles what argument only inflames. They know that people who matter usually observe patterns, not noise. They know that the fastest way to sink beneath gossip is often to stand above it. Weak men cannot tolerate this. They need immediate emotional relief. Powerful men are willing to let time do work that their ego wants to do badly. The fifth trick reveals why ignoring is often more intelligent than confronting. People expose themselves when you stop interrupting their performance. This is one of the most underestimated advantages in dark psychology. Most manipulators are not nearly as intelligent as they appear. They simply survive because other people keep helping them hide. They survive because someone always reacts too early, explains too much, argues too long, and accidentally shifts attention away from the manipulator's behavior and onto the emotional reaction it produced. In other words, the manipulator throws the stone, the target yells, and the room ends up analyzing the yell. This is exactly why certain people specialize in subtle provocation. They are not built for direct conflict under clear light. They depend on shadows, ambiguity, and emotional bait. They want to trigger you just enough that when you respond, your response looks bigger than their original act. Then suddenly they become calm, confused, even innocent. Now they are the reasonable one and you are the unstable one. This tactic works every day on men who do not understand the setup. But when you refuse to react, a different process begins. The manipulator loses the distraction. Their pattern becomes easier to see. Their repetition becomes visible. Their obsession becomes visible. Their need to provoke becomes visible. Without your explosion to hide behind, they start standing alone in the ugliness of their own behavior. And because most of them cannot tolerate invisibility, they usually escalate themselves into exposure. They push harder, become less subtle, overplay their hand, or reveal motives they were trying to keep hidden. Silence does not always defeat them immediately, but it often gives them enough room to destroy their own mask. This principle appears in every area of life. In a workplace, the colleague who quietly undermines you often depends on your emotional reaction to make you look difficult. If you remain composed long enough, their pattern starts becoming obvious to anyone with eyes. In relationships, the person who keeps provoking conflict often depends on your eventual outburst to justify their own instability. If you stop feeding the cycle, their hunger becomes impossible to hide. In social groups, the person who lives on sarcasm and covert disrespect often appears witty only because others keep reacting in ways that protect the illusion. Remove the reaction, and the cruelty stands on its own. Machiavelli would have recognized this instantly. Let a rival reveal his appetite. Let a fool reveal his lack of control. Let an insecure person show how badly they need your movement. One of the darkest forms of power is not striking first, but watching carefully enough that the other person disqualifies himself without your help. The sixth trick is this: attention is a reward, and most people have not earned yours. This sounds simple, but if you truly understand it, your entire social life changes. Most men give attention away impulsively. They hand it to anyone who triggers them, flatters them, criticizes them, teases them, or misunderstands them. They do not realize that attention is one of the most valuable currencies in human interaction. Wherever your attention goes, your mind follows. Wherever your mind follows, your energy drains. And wherever your energy drains repeatedly, your life begins bending around people who may have contributed nothing except noise. In dark psychology, one of the easiest ways to control another person is not through force, but through capture of attention. Once someone can occupy your thoughts reliably, they begin shaping your state without needing constant presence. A manipulator does not need to be with you all day if one sentence from them can make you replay conversations for hours. A jealous person does not need real power if they can provoke you into self-doubt before your next move. A disrespectful person does not need status if they can pull your focus away from your goals and into imaginary arguments in your head. This is why low-level people often hunt for high-level attention. They know they cannot rise by discipline, so they rise by disturbance. A strong man understands this and becomes highly selective about what receives his awareness. He stops treating every irritation as important. He stops mistaking emotional intensity for significance. He asks a question weak men rarely ask: does this deserve my mind? That question can save you from entire categories of wasted life. Because many things that hurt your pride do not deserve your focus. Many people who want your explanation do not deserve your clarity. Many situations that tempt your reaction do not deserve a single minute of your internal world. This does not make you cold. It makes you sovereign. There is a difference. Coldness is often wounded withdrawal. Sovereignty is disciplined allocation. The sovereign man chooses where his mind goes. He does not let random people rent space in it simply because they know how to be annoying, disrespectful, dramatic, or loud. He knows that if he cannot govern his attention, he cannot govern anything that follows, not his mood, not his discipline, not his timing, not his future. That is why ignoring can feel so offensive to the wrong people. It does not just deny them a response. It denies them rank. It tells them, without a word, that they are not important enough to rearrange your internal world. And for people who survive on emotional relevance, that kind of silence feels unbearable. Good, let it. Because once a man understands that attention is reward, he stops handing out rewards to people who bring chaos. He reserves his energy for work, for discipline, for loyalty, for purpose, for people who add structure instead of stealing it. And the moment he does that, his life begins changing in a way others can feel even before they can explain it. The fourth trick is this: the more you defend your image, the easier it becomes to damage it. This is one of the cruel paradoxes of social power, and most men learn it too late. They believe reputation is protected by constant correction. They think if someone misrepresents them, they must immediately answer. If someone spreads something false, they must set the record straight. If someone doubts them publicly, they must respond publicly. It feels logical, it feels honorable, it feels necessary, but psychologically, repeated self-defense often creates the exact impression you were trying to avoid. Why? Because desperate defense communicates insecurity faster than accusation communicates guilt. The moment a man starts chasing every rumor, every opinion, every subtle slight, he unconsciously tells the room that perception owns him. He tells people that the fastest way to control his behavior is to threaten his image. And once that becomes visible, others begin using it. Some do it intentionally. Others do it instinctively. But either way, the result is the same. You become easier to manage because your need to be seen correctly has become public knowledge. Machiavelli understood that perception matters, but he also understood something deeper: perception is not controlled through panic. It is controlled through consistency, timing, and the disciplined refusal to look rattled. A man who is endlessly correcting himself appears unstable even when he is innocent. A man who remains grounded, selective, and measured appears stronger even when others attempt to distort him. This does not mean you never respond. It means you do not respond from emotional urgency. You respond, if necessary, from strategy. There is a difference between clarification and self-defense. Clarification is brief, clean, and complete. Self-defense is repetitive, emotional, and leaking. Clarification says what needs to be said and leaves. Self-defense keeps talking because it is not trying to inform. It is trying to repair internal discomfort by forcing external agreement. That rarely works. The more a man tries to make everyone see him correctly, the more attention he draws to the very narrative he wants to erase. People begin wondering why he is working so hard. And the social mind is merciless with visible insecurity. It often trusts composure over explanation. This is why some of the strongest men in any room are misunderstood for long periods and still refuse to chase interpretation. They know that over time, behavior settles what argument only inflames. They know that people who matter usually observe patterns, not noise. They know that the fastest way to sink beneath gossip is often to stand above it. Weak men cannot tolerate this. They need immediate emotional relief. Powerful men are willing to let time do work that their ego wants to do badly.